The idea of food security has always been a foreign thing in the East, if we are really keeping it a buck. And what I did yesterday was to take us back, to 1857. And I did that because anything before 1857 would be terrible. And I don't want to say things that will now become, this person hates us. I never talk myself, they say I hate them. So, many not going to become like saying not true. So I'm not going to go into things that will actually make the East look worse than it should be. I mean, in these conversations. So if you start with 1857, you're going to need a book that was published, again, I said it earlier, in 1866. The book, of course, is called Charge Delivered on the Banks of the Niger. And that book was written by the first African bishop, Samuel Ajayi Crowther. The book is called Charge Delivered on the Banks of the Niger. When we arrived at Onitsha in 1857, we found the people in a state of idleness and with its attendant evils. They were scantily and filthily clothed, and in a state bordering upon starvation. When was this? 1857. In a state bordering upon starvation, especially between the cessation of the old and the ripeness of the new crops. The old crops were barely sufficient to supply their scanty wants for 9 months of the year. They did not grow more, although the exuberant fertile soil was ready to yield them 100-fold increase in return. The remaining 3 months was the time of dearth and scarcity, when they had to live upon fruits and other edible plants, the spontaneous produce of the fields, as might be found in the bushes anywhere. But since the introduction of the cassava plant into the country by Mr. Taylor and other fruit trees, and the people have been taught to raise a second crop of Indian corn by Mr. John Smart. By the way, Indian corn means agbado, because of course the origin of corn is actually the Americas, and the India there is referring to the Native Americans, not India as a country. Okay? Been taught to raise a second crop of Indian corn by Mr. John Smart, a scripture reader, and how to grow their yams better by the united example of all the mission agents. They have had enough to eat and to spare. The introduction of the cassava plants into the country is universally acknowledged as one of the greatest temporal blessings brought to them by the zealous minister. So this shows essentially that the idea of food security has always been a very, very tricky thing in eastern Nigeria. Parts of the east, you wouldn't see this problem in Ogoja, for instance, or in Calabar or in Akwa Ibom. It was mostly about land issues, by the way. It was because the land was not fertile enough, and that affected the quality of what they had. I mean, in this particular case, the land was fertile, but the people they didn't have the farming skills. But there's another example of places where there wasn't even fertile land. Let me read that to you from the book by Professor Onken and Zimiro. He said the higher rate of migration of certain sections of Igbo was due to, number one, land hunger, particularly around Onitsha, Oka, Okigwe, and Olu. Number two, a dearth of fertile land, as in Nnewi. Number three, rising cost of farming, as in Oguta. So, in most cases, the land is not enough, and that's a major problem. The land is not enough, and it's still an issue till today. For the most part, people don't have access to land, right? There's land hunger, but there's also another thing, which is a dearth of fertile land. So they're not able to plant, what they need to, because again, it's a densely populated area, all right? And that also accounts for some of the issues that they've always had with food. And just to be able to explain that, I'm going to read another document. This is, this is Marjorie Parham, and this was in 1960. We're trying to understand what the situation was like before the war, because yes, everybody comes around and shouts, oh, see what Awolowo did, he didn't feed our people. We're trying to understand what the entire place was like, in terms of war, in terms of population, in terms of the structure of society. So this is Marjorie Parham, and she wrote in the Listener of 20th October 1960. She says here, beneath this difficult restraint, regional differences are great. I believe that the Igbo are the main force for unity. The black privilege, yes. Majiparam wrote Lord Lugard's biography. You're very correct. Thank you, sir. Beneath these difficult restraints, regional differences are great. I believe that the Igbo are the main force for unity. They need unity. As the poorest region, they have had, by the way, she added something, though perhaps the recent strike of mineral oil will change that. The Igbos do not have mineral oil. The recent strike of mineral oil in 1956 was not in Iboland, although it was in the eastern region. It was in Oloibiri. And I've said it several times, before, and I think I just mentioned it again. The first place oil was found in Nigeria was a place called Araromi. Araromi is in Ondo State. Oil was discovered there in 1908 by a German company. That was before the First World War, right? Perhaps it was a world war or whatever it is. I didn't let them get in there. But the first place we have oil in commercial quantity was at Oloibiri in present-day Bayelsa State. So when she says here that although the recent discovery of oil, she's making the mistake of assuming that the region is the same thing as the ethnic group or the ethnicity. The people in Bayelsa are not Igbos, where the oil was found. But that's the reason I will not read that part so that doesn't muddle things up. So let me go back just to the beginning. Beneath these difficult restraints, regional differences are great. I believe that the Igbo are the main force for unity. They need unity. Whenever you hear things like, we are from a place, we can move anywhere, it's because they need that one Nigeria. Nobody needs one Nigeria like the Igbo man. Nobody. We're going to secede now, let's see. Go give us Biafra. Go now, let's see. Just understand that Biafra will be only Igbo area. They will say no. This has been an issue. This has been a game since 1967, by the way. If you give only that space, they will say no. And that's why it's because of that need that they're always saying we own this place. We're going to get more into that eventually, but let's take it one by one. So it says they are the main force for unity. They need unity. As the poorest region, they have had to pour out of their overcrowded forests to seek work all over the other regions. Is this shaming the Igbos? Of course not. It's just the reality of the time. Like at that time, even till today, it's one of the most densely populated regions of Africa. All right. There are more people there. There's a lot of people in a very small place. So the idea that and that's why, and the reason I always talk about this is because when people say things like, "Oh, we develop your place, we are coming to help you," like, "Oh, God, you didn't come to do anything. You lacked certain things that made you leave your home," which is a natural phenomenon in the world. People migrate for better opportunities. You are the only one who is living good to come and help people become better. When nobody say you be missionary. So it's important to repeat those things so that people can get it into their minds that, listen, you can live in different parts and just and thrive and do well, but make no mistakes. You didn't come to develop any place. You came to take advantage of the development that was going on there. You did not bring the development. You came to take advantage of it. And once you understand that, everybody can live in peace and harmony. Having said that, we then go to the book by John de St. John. I'm going somewhere with this. So what have we done so far? Number one, we've established the fact that there's always a problem with food. We've read Bishop Samuel Jaye Crowther's book. We've also read from Professor Zemiro talking about the land hunger or the death of fertile land, those issues they had in the eastern region. And then we moved on to what Majiparam said, that even the land, the reason the land is choked, the reason they have land hunger is because there are too many people in that place. How the people got to be so many, we'll talk about it some other time, because there's a history of that as well, but that's not for today. Then we also talk about the fact that there was death of fertile land, and also certain things that they're not able to plant in that place. So two things, some of the things will be established, of course, is that there's always been an issue of food security. There's also been an issue of land hunger because there's not sufficient land, which is one of the reasons they don't sell so much land in the east. They try to say, "Oh, come and buy, we'll pay." The truth of the matter is, no matter how much you take there, it will be very difficult. And guess what? I understand. They don't have a lot of it, so they have to conserve what they have, right? So they're being conservative about it, right? And it makes sense, okay? It's just that And by the way, that's the reason they're always shouting, I bought your land, because to them, they bought a god. Land is a god, is a deity in Iboland. So when they buy half plot in the West, nobody will rest again. I bought your land, I bought land. Okay, just bought. It's like taking a spoon from the ocean. Say, I've taken all the water. I bought the ocean. I just took a spoon. Even if you take tanker from the ocean, who will fill it? Now you go fill it. Ocean doesn't have to pay anything to get the water out. Now you go fill them. Now you go look for tanker. Now you go buy fuel. So no matter what you take, now you go fill them. So all this, I bought your land. Okay, so the reason Kotomovin John Loju is because that Kosini Bitontewa. Having said that, we'll now go to the Nigerian Civil War by John Desenjo. Starvation, malnutrition, and infant mortality have always had a high incidence throughout Nigeria, the last rising to a phenomenal 50% in some places. But even before the war began, the situation was deteriorating in the Igbo areas of the east. By far the most densely populated part of the country, only Rwanda, Burundi, and the Nile Valley match it in Africa. That's the Igbo areas. The Igbo areas relied traditionally and heavily on imported food, especially high-protein foods. These imports were paid for by the export of palm oil and kernels and by the remittances sent home from Igbos. So what we see here is that they've always had issues with food, especially protein-rich food. And so the way they got protein was to import. And they had two sources of finance to get the money to be able to get that food. Number one was revenue from agricultural products. And I've said it several times. The money the East made from agriculture, most of it did not come from Igbo land. Most of the revenue was not coming from Igbo area. If you understand what I'm about to say right now, of course, I don't want to go deep into it because there are many other sources there. But if you understand this, then you understand the need for Biafra and the need for Nigeria. The Igbos need Biafra just as they need Nigeria, but they cannot stand on their own. Most of that land, or much of the land that were producing, the agricultural revenue, was actually the Eastern minorities. In the document by Nauro, which you find in the book called Crisis and Conflict, Volume 2, Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria, Volume 2 by A.H.M. Green, Nauro mentioned that 16 million pounds out of 25 million pounds in terms of agricultural revenue came from the came from the Eastern minorities, not from the Igbo area. So that's 64%. So the idea basically is that the Igbo area was producing 36% of the money that was coming into the area through agriculture. Okay. The other area, of course, the other way they were able to fund that was through remittances. So essentially, those who were living abroad, when I say abroad in this case, abroad is Lagos, abroad is Kano, abroad is Kaduna, abroad is anywhere outside the Eastern region, right? So those who were abroad were sending money home, and that money also helped in ensuring that that the people were well taken care of as far as protein-rich food was concerned. Okay? Now, why is this important? Why is this important? It's important because, number one, if you need the agricultural produce or revenue from the minority areas to live, then it means that you're not going to let them go. Which is why NCNC, Azikiwe, Okpara, Ojuku, all of them have one thing in common. They hate the idea of the minorities having their own space, including the Igbo State Union. They hated the idea of the COR having their own region for three reasons that they needed from them: land, oil, and access to the sea. That's the reason for Biafra today. The day they make it about Igbo nation, they will get it in no time. Well, if they do the other things they're supposed to do. But as long as they're looking for Biafra, they will never get it. Why? Because those people also have a right to their own land. Nothing from the East can make the East stand alone. Now, by the way, things are better. now gas has been discovered in Imo, so maybe they can enjoy that gas. And by the way, this is my own personal desire. Once they begin to explore that gas, what I really like is that there should be what's it called, resource control, so that Imo State, people from Imo State can enjoy that gas. You know, they don't have to share the money with your people or Lagos people or Osun people. They should enjoy the money, and everybody should use what they have in their regions. That way, you can grow very fast. So I hope that happens, and I hope that also makes them to demand that region and not the entire, place that's not part of the Iboland. The second part is, if much of the money that you use to import this food is coming from remittances from your citizens living outside your region, what plans did you have when you told all of them to come back home? How would they be able to who will now support them, because they have now left the jobs they were doing, they are coming back home. So that means that you already have issues as far as protein and food are concerned.